Well, hello. I wanted to record a quick off-the-cuff video after a conversation in the Breakfast Club server today sparked a little bit of thought in my brain about how I would teach a new-ish Exceed player some fundamental Exceed skills. Um, and the basic kind of audience for this video that I'm aiming for is people who kind of understand like vaguely how the rules work. Maybe they've played a couple games, but they feel like they're kind of using their cards at random and don't really understand like the stats on the card or why certain plays are good and certain plays maybe are not advisable. So like still pretty beginner level stuff. And I wanted to start not with the speed curve. The speed curve kind of gets a lot of shine in the community, and it is a really, really important concept. It's something that we should cover, and I'm probably going to make another video right after this. But I wanted to talk about breakpoints first, which is a concept in Exceed that is very, very useful to understand early on because it can give you some kind of like level setting or like thresholds of power that you can use to evaluate card attacks. So this is part of a sort of off-the-cuff idea that I have to basically get people from, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just kind of throwing cards at random, to I can at least start to formulate sensible plays. That's the plan. I don't have a script or anything like that, so sorry about the rambling. But yeah, let's give it a shot. So, in Exceed, we have power stats, like this one, or this one, or this one, the red number. We also have guard stats, which are the green ones at the bottom. Sometimes we have armor stats too. Those are the purple ones. All that means is how much damage your attack is going to do and how much damage your opponent's attack is going to resist and possibly hit you back. For the duration of this conversation, I'm probably going to be talking about effective guard quite a bit. All that means is the combination of guard and armor. So, for example, even though Focus has 5 guard, it has 7 effective guard because it's got 2 armor, 5 guard. A breakpoint is just being able to break a certain guard threshold. And kind of the first thing that I would point out when talking about getting somebody to make sensible plays as it pertains to breakpoints is that not all power in Exceed is created equally, and that's a kind of a strange way to put this, and I want to explain really quick. Obviously, if I have a 2-power attack, of which there are none in the normals, I would prefer it to be a 3-power attack, and I would prefer that to be a 4-power attack. I'd prefer that one to be a 5-power attack. Man, I really would wish that that one was a 6-power attack, because the more damage I'm doing, the more progress I'm making in my opponent's life bar. Right? So that's kind of intuitive. The thing is that in Exceed, not every point of power you add to your attack is going to be as impactful as adding another amount of power might be. So to sort of illustrate what I mean, let's imagine that we are in a situation where we are throwing grasp into sweep. Sorry about that. So I'm throwing grasp, my opponent responds with sweep. What happens here? So if you remember how your strike interactions work, you're going to go first because you have a higher speed value. We're both in range, by the way. I forgot to mention that. I'm going to go first with my grasp. I'm going to hit for 3 damage. I'm going to move my opponent wherever I want. They're going to hit me back for 6 damage. They're going to take a card from me with sweep's hit effect. Everything's all going to go to gauge. The reason that they were able to hit back is because 3 is less than 6, right? Let's ignore for a second that there are other reasons that you might play a card, like moving your opponent or getting a discard effect. And we're really just talking about damage as how good a card is right now. Obviously, 3 is less than 6, right? By resolving this strike the way it's resolved, I have lost by 3. I've dealt 3 damage and taken 6. If we created an imaginary version of Grasp that is actually just Grasp with 4 power, the interaction would have happened pretty much the same way, except instead of losing by 3, I would have lost by 2. That would have happened if Grasp had 5 power. It would have happened if Grasp had 6 power, but it wouldn't have happened if Grasp had 7 power. If Grasp had 6 power, we would have tied, right? Putting aside the fact that maybe I lost an important card or I moved my opponent into a good spot. Damage-wise, we would have tied if Grasp had 6 power. If Grasp had 7 power, I wouldn't have won by 1. It stops going up linearly. I would have won by 7, which is crazy, right? I've gone from scaling my damage, my goodness points, basically, how much I've won a strike by 1 point of damage, to suddenly I've jumped up to 7. That's because I've broken a breakpoint. This is why this idea is so impactful. We're kind of outside of the realm of feasibility in Exceed here. It's really, really hard to find 4 bonus power that is going to allow Grasp to break Sweep, but it is possible. So maybe a more reasonable thing here might be that what if we pull, I don't know, Tatsu out, which has 4 guard. And we can see the same interaction happening, right? It's the same idea. This has 4 guard. If I did 3 damage and took 5 damage, I'd be losing by 2. If I did 4 damage and took 5 damage, I'd be losing by 1. If I did 5 damage, suddenly I'm not tying anymore. I'm winning by a lot. That's a breakpoint. So it is an important thing in Exceed to be able to hit breakpoints to do a lot of damage all at once, right? That's fairly intuitive. Because it's kind of difficult to do things like having Grasp overturn Sweep, a lot of Exceeding is trading, where, all right, well, I initiated and I hit and was hit back, and I'm up by 2 in the strike interaction. And then my opponent does the same thing, and they're up by 3 in the strike interaction. And our life totals kind of whittle down over time together. And then you supplement that with 1 or 2 big, clean wins that are very impactful. And if you can do that, and you can avoid your opponent doing that to you, you've probably won the game. So this is not something that we can feasibly stand to do every time we play a card. It's pretty unlikely that we're always going to be able to hit a breakpoint, a relevant, important breakpoint that allows us to win crushingly the way that I just described it. It's way more likely that most of the time we're going to be trading. But if we want to be thinking about how to make sensible plays, one way to do it is to put together attacks that hit relevant breakpoints, right? So, and I keep saying relevant breakpoints, and there's a reason for that. And to get into why, I want to talk about sort of like the dispersion of different effective guard values across Exceed. Among the normals, we can see that 4 of them don't even have armor or guard at all. They're not printed, but they're both 0. We have a 4, a 6, a 7, and a probably just infinity, right? Block can add armor per force spent at a pretty good rate. It's very tough to stun block unless you're ignoring armor or your opponent is completely out of resources. So really, we have a 4, a 6, and a 7. Those are all pretty important breakpoints to talk about. To be exhaustive about it, we'd really have to look at like every card ever printed in Exceed, but that would be pretty excessive. So anyway, here's every card printed in Exceed. Actually, no, it's every card from Season 3 onward in Exceed, and they're organized by effective guard value. These ones over here, this stack of 345, are cards that don't have any guard at all. Then we have a single 2 guard, some 3 guard, some 4 guard, some 5 guard, 6, 7, 8, and then up here is stun immune. So just kind of off the bat here, I should also mention for people who might be sort of rule sticklers, for the most part, this is kind of a rough estimate, but for the most part, I tried to have everything be sort of best case scenario for the card. So there are some cards that say, if you have uh, a certain number of cards in hand plus 2 armor, let's just give them that. Let's just kind of make it a good showing for the card. There's also a few edge cases, things like characters who can spend resources to get extra guard, like Anji. I sort of ignored that. This is just kind of a sample size. It's not exhaustive exactly, but it's a lot of cards here. And the first thing that we can look at is that a lot of cards don't have them at all. The second thing that might stand out as we go over these relative ratios, we can see there's a single 2 guard card, 2 effective guard card, 32 3, 48 4s, 45s, 55 6s, 19 7s, only 5 8s, and then 24 stun immunes. And we can map our guarded normals pretty easily here to one of these categories or another. This is a 4. This is basically stun immune most of the time. This is 7. This is 6, right? So right off the bat, we can see that if we took our imaginary grasp that has this slider that lets us just adjust the power whenever we want, in many matchups, going from, 2 power to 3 power isn't going to do anything at all, really, because there are almost no cards in Exceed that have only 2 effective guard, right? And this one really is just here to soak a little bit of damage. It's not expecting you to use it to resist something, really. So going from a hypothetical 2 power to a hypothetical 3 power really isn't that big a deal most of the time. Except, every single one of these cards, when used as an EX attack, has 2 effective guard. So going from 2 power to 3 power does overturn that interaction and allows us to beat those cards cleanly. That could be relevant. Going from 3 guard to 4 guard would let us beat these 32 cards. And these are, actually, I learned this while sorting these, many of these cards are from Guilty Gear. This is a much less common guard value for the first little bit of Exceed's lifespan, and then suddenly became quite a bit more relevant in more recent seasons. In fact, the most recent season. The same is actually true of 5, which we'll get to in a second. But so if I used my imaginary power slider on Grasp to go from 3 power to 4 power, I would be able to deal with all of these cards very effectively. And that's cool. Many of these cards are kind of specifically designed to deal with Cross and Grasp. We can intuit that because among the normals, the cards that every single character will have, Cross and Grasp are the cards that deal 3 damage, right? That have 3 power. Some characters have some specials that deal that much, but we can at least assume that everybody's going to have access to a couple cards that do it. These cards are typically 4 in some way, dealing with one or both of those cards. How much better off am I if I can go from 4 power to 5 power? Approximately 48 cards better, dispersed over about 5 seasons worth of Exceed, plus a normal. So we would probably say that going from 4 power to 5 power is our first really relevant breakpoint. I think this one is arguable. I think that going from 2 to 3 is also arguable because EX attacks are real, and that's something that you should be aware of. But this is a lot of cards. These are, especially when you're playing slightly older seasons, 4 speed, 4 guard, or 3 speed, 4 guard is a very common, like, stable-ish defensive shape. Look at your character's kit and see if they got any decently fast 5 power options, because suddenly all of these cards just stop working into them. And that could definitely be relevant. It's also the first time we have a normal among the cards that we're talking about here. Again, this is a card that everybody has access to. Spike is interesting when we're talking about breakpoints because really, Spike tends to lose combat even if it's not stunned fairly often because Spike has a range shadow at 1. So it tends to lose to movement. It tends to whiff rather than be stunned. However, you if you've played Exceed enough to know, you might know that Spike also kind of randomly just beats cards accidentally sometimes, even things in weird board states, even things that it might not seem like it should beat. So it might be fairly relevant to deal with Spike, but also there's just a lot of cards that have 4 guard. And getting up to 5 power is just by the averages, it's quite likely that your opponent is going to have a card that has something like that in their kit. The other reason that Spike is not super relevant to deal with is that it's kind of a call out to use it as a defensive card anyway. So if your opponent is the kind of person who might use Spike defensively, they might be crazy. 5 guard. So we return to our question: how much better off am I if I go from 5 power to 6 power? About 40 cards better. Again, this is something that became much more prevalent in more recent seasons. Prior to that, 5 guard was actually quite rare. So we're kind of seeing a more even distribution of how important hitting these different breakpoints are. There are no 5 guard normals. Going from 5 power to 6 power doesn't do anything to overturn normal interactions, with some really, really edge case exceptions. For example, if you are doing 6 power with ignore armor, suddenly you're stunning focus. I say that that's not that's an edge case, but like I look at Ken or I look at Baiken, and Axe Kick and Yozansen certainly do like that little bit of extra bonus power that lets them deal with focus. So hey, I mean it's not nothing. But going from 5 to 6 power, unless you are up against one of these cards, may not be as relevant, especially because many of these cards are quite slow, sometimes around 2 speed, the 5 guard cards. There tends to be a relationship where slower cards tend to be bulkier. And among your normals, you have a card already that deals 6 damage that tends to make these cards a little bit dicey on defense. Because sweep beats them cleanly. And man, you do not want to lose to sweep cleanly. If you're going to lose to sweep, you'd really like to trade into it. How much better off are you if you go from 6 power to 7 power? Wow, that's a lot of cards. This is the highest, other than unguarded cards. This is our biggest pile by a fairly hefty margin, actually, by 7 cards. And one of them is sweep. Going from 6 power to 7 power is really scary. And we will talk quite a bit more about why and how we can use that as a kind of an anchor point to think about how to make sensible plays or how to use it for a formation of a strategy in a little bit here. But just off the top here, a very large number of quote unquote safe cards and sweep, which is one of the most threatening, stable, great cards in the game, all suddenly cannot be used into an attack that is faster than speed 2 that has 7 power. How much better off are you by going from 7 to 8? Well, you deal with focus. That's amazing. Focus is probably the most stable defensive card in the game. You also deal with these 19 cards, which is much less than 55. Many characters don't have anything like focus. This tends to be reserved for big, huge, bulky, buff guys like Jacko here. Tager, has a 7 effective guard. Potemkin, characters like that. The other reason that this tends to be slightly less relevant as a breakpoint than 7 is because, man, it's really hard to reach it. It's quite hard to actually reach 7 sometimes for some characters, but reaching 8 is sometimes kind of out of the realm of feasibility. It's if your character can do it, that is like an important thing about them that your opponent really needs to know, that maybe even their focus isn't safe just by raw damage alone. But many characters, it's just not feasible to really think about breaking focus without some kind of ignore armor or ignore guard button. How much better off are you going from 8 power to 9 power? Almost not better at all. There are so few cards that have 8 effective guard that at this point we kind of stop caring. Except obviously for the linear and the dopamine hit. But except for other than just doing more progress on your opponent's life bar, these are very, very rare that we are going to specifically be trying to reach 9 power. It'd be hard as hell to do anyway, but reaching 9 power to deal with one of these cards, unless you are one of the characters, you're up against one of the characters who has them, really, we can almost kind of sort of sometimes think of these cards as stun immune, because they are so hard to break outside of throwing a spike into them or something like that, that they almost sometimes might as well be. And then we have the actual stun immune cards, and block, which kind of feels like a stun immune card sometimes. That really there is no breakpoint high enough that could really deal with them. So our first kind of takeaway here is that if you're going to be boosting your power to deal with certain cards, you want to know what cards you're trying to beat. And in all likelihood, the cards you're trying to beat are something that has 6 guard and therefore needs 7 power. If you are privileged, maybe you're trying to beat a focus. Or you're probably trying to beat a 4 guard button with a 5 power button. More recently, you might also be trying to beat a 3 or a 5, but those are typically a little bit less relevant. And you are going to really only be dealing with trying to break 2 if you are trying to scout an EX attack or something like that. And there are attacks in Exceed that just lose to EX attacks, like any EX attack, because they just don't do enough damage to stun them. So that's takeaway number 1. And in terms of like the tier list here, I would say that this is by far the most important number to try to be able to represent as a threat. And then probably like these two are around the same, just in terms of how difficult it is to break focus. It would be higher, but most characters can't even really do it. And then I would probably put 3 and 5 somewhat below that. So how do we actually break our 6 guard breakpoint? How do we find that power? If you go and look at your normals here, I have a set of older normals from season 2, and this is true across all of seasons 1 through 5, and honestly is even more true in seasons 6 and 7, because they have different boosts. We have +2 power here, we have +2 speed here, we have +1 armor, +3 guard over here. None of those boosts exist in later seasons of Exceed. If you go and look at these boosts and kind of just try to put them together with other attacks, you'll find that it's surprisingly difficult to meaningfully overturn strike interactions. Certainly to meaningfully overturn these ones. It's not actually very hard. If you boost Fierce, I'm going to be very hard pressed to defend with Tatsu, because everything now, probably because there are so few 2 power cards in Exceed, probably everything is just going to run over Tatsu. But let's say, for example, that I have boosted Fierce, and I have a handful of every other normal in the game. And the thing I'm trying to do is hit 7 power. Well, my other copy of Grasp that I also have in my hand can't do it. It would hit for 5. And that's cool. It deals with that breakpoint, but it doesn't deal with this awesome one that I'm really trying to hit. Cross doesn't. Assault doesn't. Assault matches it. We've got up to 6. Dive does. However, most of the time you're using Dive, you're using it at range 3-ish anyway, where it already beats Sweep. Same with Spike. Spike would hit for 7, but it already has Ignore Armor, Ignore Guard on it, which would deal with Sweep. Focus can't. That would tie. Block obviously can't even hit. Sweep itself, now that hits 8 power, which is not only enough to break Sweep, it's also enough to break Focus, those are both crazy, right? That's awesome. Except I've used my turn to boost Fierce. And if my opponent just mashes that sweep into me, I'm not winning by 8 by breaking their sweep. I'm taking 6 damage and then dealing 8 back. So I'm only winning by 2, which is not nearly the impactful example that I showed you earlier. So just among the normals alone, it's actually really hard to find ways to mess with sweep, for example. And lower guard breakpoints are, commensurately easier to deal with. This is one of the reasons that Sweep is such an important card. Honestly, in some ways, Exceed is kind of built around the fact that this is a simplification, but honestly, Exceed is kind of built around the idea that Assault plus Fierce doesn't break Sweep. It's kind of like a backbone of the game. So, if we can't do it with our normals, we're going to have to look for some other way to deal with it. And not every character has those things. But something that every character does have access to is EX attacks, which is another point of power. So suddenly, Fierce plus EX Assault, now Sweep is unsafe. And every character has those cards. Fierce plus EX Sweep, or just EX Sweep on its own, both very handily deal with Sweep. Fierce plus EX Sweep even would actually somehow deal with these imaginary cards down here that are so hard to break that we didn't even consider them. That's a lot of resources committed, but that's kind of the point. In order to break these cards, you are going to have to commit resources to it. And often you will have to do it in a way that is not totally guaranteed. So, for example, the classic way to deal with Sweep are Dive at range 3 or Spike. We haven't talked about the speed curve yet, but if you've skipped ahead in the lesson a little bit, you will know that these two things are under curve and therefore not quite as guaranteed as we would like. That's just going to happen. That's how Exceed works. In order to deal with a card like Sweep, you might have to take on some risk or commit a lot of resources. So I would say that one thing that we can glean from this is just that looking at your character and trying to figure out what they can do to hit 7 power in like a reasonably resource efficient way is a sensible play you can make. Let's go look at a couple characters really quick, because there's plenty of ways to do this. There are lots of characters who have other power boosts, and over the course of maybe 2 turns, they build up to enough power to break Sweep. There are plenty of characters, like, for example, Ryu here, who has just some 5s among their power that are way, way more impactful with a Fierce down to deal with Sweep. There are characters like Soul Bad Guy, for example, who doesn't even have access. I'm blind. I can't find Soul. Who doesn't even have access to Fierce. But he does have access to his Exceed mode, which is plus 2 power, and I don't know, any power-based cancelable boost. The combination of which will get him to plus 3 power, which would make Assault break sweep, for example. Would make any of his, with 3 power, this might break sweep, this break sweep, this break sweep, this break sweep, this would break sweep anyway, this break sweep, that break sweep if you initiate with it. Yeah, that does too. Yeah, so I mean, with plus 3 power, suddenly it becomes pretty trivial to deal with sweep. That's pretty important, actually. If you have a boost with a 3 on it, a red 3, that's a whole lot better than a red 2 because of this whole interaction up here between assault and sweep. Lots and lots of stable, easy to use. This is basically assault, right? 1 to 3 range, gains advantage, 5 speed, 4 power. It's very, very similar. There's a lot of cards like that with a fierce are just short of breaking it. So the first thing that you ask yourself when you look at your character, if you're dealing with sweep, is do I have any plus 3 powers? Soulshare does. May probably does as another character. Very famously, Akuma in Exceed mode can just do this. If you're familiar with the Excess Exceed series, my first lesson was on Akuma, and the reason that D started with Akuma was because he's a really, really great character to teach you about the value of breakpoints, and breakpoints is a really important skill to know. Let's do this really quick. Let's pull 2 characters kind of semi-randomly, and just look at what let's just pull 2 Guilty Gear characters really quick. We got Testament. We got Jacko. These will be interesting. Honestly, these might be too complicated for the kind of thing that we're talking about here. Let's just do Sol and Kai. Sol is going to be kind of amped because Sol has a lot of power in his kit, right? But let's look at this from Kai's perspective. Let's say that I'm playing Kai into Sol, and I probably shouldn't have. I probably want his references. Sorry about that. Let's try that one more time. Let's say that I'm playing Kai into Sol, and I've never played this matchup before in my life, and I want to see what options I have to hit those breakpoints, right? Because odds are I have something, even if it's not, plus 3 power the way that Sol can do it, right? So, and this is kind of the last part of the lesson here that I want to touch on. We're kind of moving out of theory into some mild application. Do this with your characters. Whatever character you're playing, go and find what they can do to deal with sweep. So let's just go lay out all of our target cards here. All 7 of them, all 8 of them. I guess Sol has 8 cards. He sure does. I just remembered that. Okay, and then here's all of my cards. And all we're going to do, this is very simple. All we're going to do is just compare some numbers and see what kinds of shapes we can build. I should probably spawn some Season 7 normals. I'll do that in just a second. Let's just look at the cards themselves first. All right, so in terms of breakpoints, we've got 2 ultras that we're not going to worry about for now. We have a 6. That looks an awful lot like sweep. We have 0. We have 4. We have 3, or really probably 5. We have 3. Okay, so we have a pretty big distribution of numbers here. Meanwhile, this is 0, and also, I mean, we do have a 3 on Sol's 3-gauge ultra that you probably won't see unless your opponent is really cool. Meanwhile, on Kai's side, we have some pretty modest power values, right? We've got 3, we got 4, we got 5, we got 3, maybe 5. We got 5, we got 6. Man, I mean, compared to what Sol can do with, especially in Exceed mode, really none of these are looking super great, right? And we don't really have much at all. We have +1 power. We have another +1 power. These are both, this is a cancelable boost, which is pretty cool. But we really don't have much that can stop Soul, right? So in terms of what we're trying to beat, let's just bring Sweep down, because it's actually not super difficult to find things that can deal with 4s, and I'm not sure Kai has much of anything that can deal with a 7. But yeah, let's look at Sweep really quick. In the context of Soul's kit, this looks a lot like Night Raid Vortex, right? It's a big rangy 2-speed 6-guard button. This is just super consistent stuff. So I can look at Kai's kit just at a glance and say, I've got 1 power, maybe 2, and then I've got Badass among my normal boosts. Let me go find those really quick. I'll just pull them out of 1 second. Is it possible that I don't know how to spawn normals quickly? You love to see it. Let's just pull them out from Kai's deck really fast. This is what I normally do anyway. So I'll just pull the relevant ones. We have +1 power from Let's Rock. We have Badass. That's it anyway. Okay. So let's look at all of our sources of power. Here's +1. Here's +1. Here's +1. Here's +1. Notably, this one passes turn, this one passes turn, this one is cancelable, this one is cancelable. So if I really, really work hard as Kai, I could conceivably beat Sweep or Night Raid Vortex by, I don't know, Thunderseal cancel, Badass cancel, Diaraclay. That's a lot of resources. I'm doing it in 1 turn, right? That's kind of cool, but that's a lot. I'm doing a lot of work to deal with a stable card that Soul can do pretty trivially in his kit. What else can I do? Do I have any sort of ignore guard options, anything like that? No, not really. Kai really doesn't seem to have much, does he? And that's true. Not every character is going to. So that tells us something about Kai's game plan. That he's probably not going to, as if you couldn't tell by just looking at the guy, he's probably not going to brute force his way through his opponent's attacks very often. He's probably got some other ways to deal with consistent attacks like that. Or maybe he's just kind of weak to them in particular, and we need to commit more of our game plan than usual to dealing with those slow, consistent cards. Meanwhile, Soul clearly doesn't care about my sweep. He probably doesn't really even care about my focus once he's set up, right? He can break those as long as he has any sort of resource advantage at all. He can convert that into power very, very consistently and just kind of run over my slow guardy cards. There's a clear imbalance going on here on this particular axis of these 2 character strategies, right? So what else can I do? Where can I find other things that can deal with sweep and focus? Let's see. I would say one thing that we neglected is the possibility of EX attacks adding to our power math here that allow us to break focus. To break sweep. EX sweep is always an option. We do have kind of a dedicated get off me button in Diaraclay, which specifically at range 2. If we go to our board over here, let me delete some stuff very quick here. But if we go to our board over here, we can see that the interactions for these 2 cards in particular actually change substantially. If I'm here, where I will push him 2, and then he will hit me back anyway, versus if I'm here, when I will push him 2 and then he'll whiff. Of course, Soul also does at least still have Night Raid Vortex, where even here, if I push him, he comes right back in again and hits me back, and is probably in a pretty good position for me. That's really scary, right? So in order to deal with that, even with my kind of dedicated sweep counterattack card, in order to deal with Night Raid Vortex, I'd probably need to like Thunder Seal, and then, I don't know, hit it from range 3 or something, move him to range 5, and then hope I have some kind of zoning follow-up. Again, this is a lot of resources, and these are specific plans that I'm going to have to make to what I am increasingly learning is something that Kai is going to have some trouble with in this matchup. So I'm thinking about how I'm going to devote my resources to problematic cards. One of the things that I found is the combination of Dire Clay and Thunderseal. Another thing that might be helpful is specifically playing to dodge the cards rather than break them or push them out of the way. So, for example, dive, even at range 1 where it won't hit, just getting out of the way of the predicted sweep. It could be a play that I as Kai am going to lean on in this matchup. This is also completely theoretical for me at this point, right? These are plans I'm making prior to the game, just by looking at my characters and my character and my opponent's character, and trying to work out some preliminary basic strategies. Then I'll go play a game and test them and find out, oh, actually, Thunderseal into Dire Clay is way too many resources, and I really should be using Thunderseal as Ride the Lightning instead, or something, right? My point is that I'm going to go and test these ideas out later, and not just rely on the theory that I'm developing. So, in other words, it's okay to be wrong at this stage and just to lose to the thing that you're trying to beat, or to commit too hard to trying to beat it and lose in other ways. But all we're doing right now is walking through the strategy development process. So what else can I do to deal with those problematic cards? I have a couple of ways to stay out of range of them. I have Kai's cancelable, I have a cancelable boost, or I'm sorry, a cancelable action, for example, that allows me to advance or retreat 1. So if I want to, I can probably always stay in sort of this range, right? And try to avoid range 1 where that Dire Clay trick doesn't beat sweep. So maybe my plan is to try to hang out at range 2 against Soul. Hey, wait a minute. Aren't there a couple of cards that Kai has? Hey, this specifically tells me that I have a special bonus at range 2. Huh. Well, I'll put that in my head for later on. I'll think about that, but it seems like maybe that's something that I should be investigating a little bit more, doesn't it? Hey, this is another one that says at range 2 I have +2 power and I gain advantage. Interesting. Oh, it's probably nothing. Yeah, let's think a little bit more about what Kai can do into cards like this. Well, if I'm hanging out at range 2 anyway, I wonder if I want to be crutching on Spike more often. Maybe even defensive Spike, which is really, really ballsy, because honestly, it's not a very good defensive card. But if I'm really, really afraid of these two cards that I have so much difficulty dealing with, well, I mean, they beat those. What else would they deal with on offense, let's say, on my side? I'm sorry, on Soul's side. Well, they're not going to deal with Wild Throw because he's not going to be playing Wild Throw at range 2. If he initiates, it's going to lose to Volcanic Viper, but if I initiate, it won't, because it'll trade up at least. It'll beat Bandit Bringer. It will probably not deal with Tyrant Rave most of the time. It's pretty rare board states where that's going to happen, I think. Honestly, no, I don't. I don't think it will. Same with Heavy Mob, right? Although on offense, it will actually. Interesting. Okay, cool. So I'll put that in my head that maybe I should crutch on Spike a little bit more often in this matchup than I otherwise might. And hey, wait a minute. If I'm putting, Spike also has on it, Faultless Defense as a boost, which boosts my guard by 4. So this is a question I can ask in this hypothetical for later. How much would 4 guard help against Soul, who can hit for, I think, about 1 billion damage? Maybe I need it to deal with, to bolster something like Foudra Arc up to 7 guard so that I can at least contest some things. Or maybe I need to boost even Sweep to make it 10 guard and basically unstunnable, so I can at least fight back against Soul's huge damage numbers and keep myself in the game. Or maybe it's better used as Spike, or Dust, I guess. Sorry, I've been saying the name of the normal wrong because this is a Guilty Gear set. Maybe it's better used as Dust, where I can use it to stun out these 2 problematic cards that I don't know what to do with otherwise. Maybe I play 2 games. And one game I try to crutch on Faultless Defense when I really need it, and then the other I try to throw some dusts to deal with Sweep and Night Raid. Maybe I can do a little bit of reading of my opponent here and figure out that they're the kind of player who knows that Spike is, or even Dire Clay, is going to deal quite handily with at least some of these cards some of the time when I'm at range 2, and they're going to be devoting more of their time to sticking at range 1, and they won't even throw these cards at range 2. Well, awesome. Now I don't even need the Spike. I can just hold it over their head forever and do other good stuff because they're never going to hit me with these cards that they're afraid to play into me because they know they could lose. Or maybe they're wild men and they're saying, you know what, I don't care. You got Thunder Seal at range 3. I'm sweeping you. You tell me, you're show me how crazy you are too. Well, cool. That's a player read too. I need to take that into account that my opponent might be kind of crazy. So this is all just the pregame stuff that I might be thinking about just based off of these 2 cards. I'm just kind of saying extemporaneously where my mind goes. Do that with your characters. Put together a couple of cards that you see being a problem that you don't really see a way to deal with, and then just think about how to commit resources to those specific cards. And you will have the beginning of a strategy. I'm trying to think if there's any value in doing that again for other characters. I love this exercise. It's a really easy way to just get your mind going and to sort of test out what you think works in Exceed. Do it against different players, do it against different characters, because it will get you completely different results. You'll probably be wrong often. And the more you learn about the game, the less wrong or the less frequently wrong you'll be. And that's cool. What other things might Kai have? Let's say, actually, you know what? Let's say I've decided that I have literally 0 plays against Sweeper, Night Raid, Vortex. Well, I have Parry on block. So maybe I devote every single thing I've got to dealing with those 2 problematic cards. I can't deal with them any other way. Cool. I'll do it that way. Maybe I will throw a Let's Rock. I'll leverage Kai's better economy and movement over Soul. Wait for Soul to whiff on some important turn when he's down on resources. Put down a Let's Rock when I know he's going to spend his turn preparing, and then just throw Sweep with 7 power, because now he's given me the turn back. Maybe I can leverage an economic advantage into a positional one somehow. This is Exceed. There's a lot of different ways to win a game. It's not all breakpoints. the point of this lesson is to use this one facet of the game to kind of lead you into another one. Yeah, that's it. I hope this was helpful. I hope it wasn't too rambly for everybody. I'm thinking about doing more things like this in the future, so we'll see if it's fun. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.